Hello, and thank you for joining us for our first Reimagining Talent webinar of 2024 as we look into the future of HR, presented to you today by People Science and FutureSolve. My name is Jessica Alberto, Director of Process and Implementation at People Science, and I'll be your moderator for today. To our viewers, welcome. We're happy to have you here. And we're also happy to answer any questions you may have throughout the hour. So at any point during today's discussion, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to make sure we get those questions answered for you. And on to the panel. Today, we have a really brilliant group with us. It brings a great amount of HR expertise and knowledge to share. As always, our webinar presenter is Christine Nicholas, founder and CEO of People Science and HireGate. Christine founded People Science in 1997 to help companies solve their toughest recruiting challenges. People Science has partnered with many HR and TA departments over the last 26 years, including many Fortune 100 companies as well as startups. And what we do there is helping them develop and execute recruitment strategies, enhance recruitment process improvements, and create solutions to the toughest recruitment challenges. And on to our special guest for today. We have Ken Carrig, co-founder of FutureSolve, a company that brings together the full spectrum of human capital advisory services for organizations. And Ken will tell us a little bit more about FutureSolve in a few minutes. But prior to FutureSolve, Ken served as the Chief HR Officer for Truist, Comcast Cable, Cisco, and Continental Airlines. He's a fellow in the National Academy of Human Resources and is co-author of 2 books, Strategic Execution, Driving Breakthrough Performance in Business, and Building Profit Through Building People. And we can send you the links to those books in the email after the webinar today. Next, we have Clem Cheng. He's a business advisor at FutureSolve and was a former SVP of Human Resources for Comcast Cable. Prior to that, Clem held senior HR leadership positions at Cigna, W.L. Gore & Associates, and Citigroup. Clem is a recipient of the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity and Communications Most Influential Minorities Award and the OCA Corporate Achievement Award. So welcome, Ken and Clem. We're so happy to have you here today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
So Ken, can you tell us a little bit more about FutureSolve and what it is you do?
Thanks, Jess. And happy to be able to participate in this with People Science and Christine. Good to work with you again, and Clem. Just a quick background on FutureSolve. We co-founded the business to really help mid-cap companies with talent and technology solutions. And some of the key pillars that we have are like leadership alignment. We also focus around culture transformation, succession planning. We leverage both advisors, CHROs who have since semi-retired. We have 35 of those on our portfolio with new and technology solutions. That can help mid-cap companies who are sometimes strapped with infrastructure or strapped with time to come up with people and talent solutions. And so we're a business that's really there for other businesses and the people in those businesses. Couple of the interesting items that we have is a performance index, where we go in and kind of do an assessment with that company on where they stand in their geography and their industry, and then try to provide innovative solutions to kind of help them get to market or even better than market. So enough of the paid political announcement. Happy to be here to kind of talk about the macro trends and what we can do about those. And Clem, is there anything you'd add as our business development lead?
I think you got it, Ken. Well done.
All right.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're here. I met Ken quite a few years ago. I'm not going to say how long ago, right? Clem, I've heard your name about 1,000 times, and now I feel like I know you because we've been talking back and forth. But one of the things that we try to do with our Reimagining webinars is bring brilliance here. And we know that in the human resource space, right, in the human capital space, whether it be technology or process engineering, that we are sorely lacking not just hands-on, but futuristic thinking. And then in a practical sense, how do we make those things turn into realities? And pushing that, kind of, I hate to say it like this, but pushing the boulder up the hill to get to the table. When I met Ken quite a few years ago, he was CHRO at, was that Comcast, I guess?
Yes.
a good lineage of not only coming in and being able to look at the picture, but make things happen, and getting to know Clem, it's the same thing. So what we're going to talk about today is what FutureSolve is seeing as the future. And then of course, hello to our followers, that base is growing. We're going to start to talk about those 4 pillars right today. So we'll talk about the numbers from last year, which are pretty exciting. We're going to take a look at just a brief glance at where we are with AI in human resources and in technology. We'll also be taking a look at and just have a conversation around diversity. And then we'll talk about what's going on with return to work. Combined with that, we'll be talking about what FutureSolve is saying and what Jess is saying and what People Science is saying for 2024. What a year. So if we take a glimpse back, let's just take a look at the numbers. So the most recent JOLTS report shows that we added 8.79 million jobs, which is up a tick from the month before, which was at 8.73. So essentially still the same, yet analysts are still baffled, which is kind of amazing to me. And I'll get to that point again in a second, but let's just take a look at jobs added. So last year we added 2.7 more jobs than we had started the year with. So still on a quick growth. The prior year, going back to 2022, that was actually at 4.1 million. So cut in half, but still a good growth clip. I mean, essentially it would take 5 years to catch up from where we were if we were in fact falling behind. And my point to these numbers is that we are not in any type of historical cycle. If you look back at employment over the years since the Industrial Revolution, when we started to count things, right, which that may even be a little preliminary, what you'll see is there's never been this strong a jobs economy in a steady sense, minus 2020 or a pandemic, right? And I really think it's going to take something that earth-moving at this point to change that, and that's one of the things we'll talk about. The unemployment rate has stayed essentially the same. I think the highest we hit was 3.9. The lowest was 3.4. We're finishing out the year with 2 consecutive months at 3.7. So the numbers are there. The economy is strong. What's interesting to me, and I just put an article out on LinkedIn the other day, why, and Ken and Clem and Jeff, why are economists still saying, oh, that's going to come down because we're going to go into a recession? It's time to measure things differently, don't you think?
Totally agree.
Absolutely, Christine. I think and it like a lot of things, it's a both and. I think some of these numbers that you speak to in terms of employment levels and unemployment and whatnot, we'll continue to measure those. The first thing I'd acknowledge though is how darn hard it is to actually predict where the economy is going, because as I think you're alluding to, most economists and actually like Wall Street, analysts thought last year was going to be a lost year, and it really wasn't. I mean, the stock market actually, performed super well. But the numbers that you mentioned, I agree with you that they don't really tell the whole story. I mean, today's workforce is so much different than it was 10 years ago. You have a lot more independent people, a lot more freelancers. I'm not sure how good a job the traditional numbers do in terms of capturing the way people earn income nowadays. The other thing I think that's lacking is the statistics that really show the flow of how labor moves into different roles, how people elevate themselves from one kind of role to another. I think that's going to be increasingly important to better understand, especially, we're going to talk a little bit later, I think, about some AI impact, but, the nature of the work that people do is going to continue to evolve. I don't really see any statistics that kind of give a good glimpse of how, the shape and composition of what people are actually doing for work is shifting, in the future. Ken, anything you would add on to?
I mean, I think the only thing I would add is organizations have learned and are learning to be more agile because of the dynamic environment that we're in. And it's just surprising to me that economic indicators are still staid and traditional from a decision-making standpoint. And I think they just need to be more flowing indicators to kind of give at least a sense as to where things are going forward, which is very, very difficult and very uncertain.
Well, and I think what we hear too is the 3 key factors when it comes to the economy, right? So it's jobs, of course, that we've already talked about, but it's, equities are high.
Yep.
Fuel prices are right where they should be, yet nobody knows what to do. And I think a big portion of that is the fear of AI. I mean, I can speak from our client's perspective, right? So if I look across the board at the people that we're most engaged with, we've seen, especially in the tech sector, we've seen a lot of pull-in, because pull-in meaning, you know, we're not sure where this product is going to go because now we have identified a new AI tool, or perhaps there'll be, or we're creating an AI tool. So there's all this kind of, you know, where is it going to go? I really feel like we've seen a lot of that, and it was pretty surprising to me in the last few weeks how many companies are moving past that, are saying, okay, we still want to make a profit this year, right? We still need to put the line in the sand and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to develop, and AI will move with us. You know, and I think the only reference point we have to that is going back to the 80s when the PC hit the market, right? Everything changed. And I think one of the most interesting things that I realized the other day, thank you, Simon Sino, who I happen to follow, and we put a clip of that up the other day. I think People Science put it out. But, you know, there was no such thing as a mass layoff until the 1980s. Capitalism survives well without it. It just became a plug-in. You know, and so I think that's really interesting. And I do remember the fear of what a PC would do, particularly in accounting and finance. And you know, I was very young at the time, new to the staffing industry. I think I was in it at that point. And we got a call from IBM, and they said, we want to meet you. And they asked us to meet us and a couple other agencies in the basement of a bank in Philadelphia that was sealed when we walked in, and they wanted to talk about a new term that they had, which was right sizing. Right. They weren't going to use the term layoff because IBM had never had layoffs, but they were talking about right sizing. It's over 20 years, so I can talk about this because we actually have to sign NDAs. You know, but I think if we can think in terms of what things were like then, and we got past that by embracing technology and saying, it's not going to change my life tomorrow, although it might kind of, in the email that I'm sending, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to change all my workflow at once. That we need to embrace it and kind of go into it slow and not hold our breath. And I think that's the biggest challenge that I see. A lot of fear around, should I pull the trigger on this new technology because it might get better in a year? These are HR questions that we're hearing now. Should I change my workflow process because AI could maybe change this for me later? So I think we've got to brave up a little bit. Any thoughts around
that? I think that's a great analogy, by the way, and it, you know, it goes back as my early years as a HR professional in those companies, and I was with PepsiCo at the time, that were able to adapt and invest in the learning in learning new skills, were the ones that end up winning there. And I think it's going to be very similar. There are going to be winners and losers, like there always is in an economic situation, but there's opportunities to learn and adapt to what AI is going to bring and lean into that. So a great point.
Yeah. Well, Christine, I think there's two other examples though of technology that for me come to mind. You know, you're right, like the advent of the PC changed things a lot. But I think the internet was like game changing in terms of how people work and actually how people shop, and you know how they service things and whatnot. And then, you know, perhaps to a lesser degree, I think social media has changed a lot of things. I mean, who would have thought that there's a job, you know, you could make a lot of money being an influencer or something of that sort. You know, we started last year at the beginning of 2023. There was a lot of doom and gloom and prognostication around AI supplanting, you know, jobs. It's interesting how over the course of a year, the sentiment and dialogue shifted a lot to AI being more like the internet in terms of supplementing how people do their work, making people more productive, making them more effective and efficient and so forth. So I do think that's probably where, you know, people feel like the puck is moving more than actually purely replacing jobs. But to a degree, there's always been jobs. You know, automation has done a lot since the Industrial Revolution to replace jobs. So as Ken said, like the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are agile, you know, and kind of adapt to it.
And I think it's that balance, right? Which is a great segue into, so what are we seeing? We're talking about it as far as AI and HR is concerned. Obviously, you know, going to be one of the major topics for this year and continuing on. Again, I think we are starting to embrace it, but a couple bullet points that we would stress out there, and that is that understand that you are in an ecosystem. right? And that the ecosystem, so when you're thinking about AI, and some of the decisions I think that Jess, right, that have gone against the grain are picking a tool that's really great for your recruiters and really great for reporting, but jeopardizes the candidate experience, right? And vice versa. So for example, when we had Gabrielle Judge, what's her
Lazy girl jobs.
hashtag lazy girl jobs on, and she was talking about certainly from the Gen Z's perspective, the idea of spray and pray with your resume, right? So I fill out an application and then it's distributed, AI distributes it for like $30 a month to 300 different positions, and looking at those tools and saying, well, wait a minute, what's that going to do to my applicant tracking system? And how is this really going to make things better? My concern too is looking on the flip side at tools that are being used internally that aren't necessarily taking the whole picture. So when we think about the ecosystem, when you think about any technology, thinking about the ecosystem and understanding, and this is a good segue into our topic of power in the workforce, right? Which part of our return to work strategy is around. But when we look at this ecosystem, certainly the largest part of that ecosystem is the candidate, whether the candidate is in the seat or not in the seat, whether they're working passive or non-passive, they are a big part of this ecosystem. And some of the fall downs we're seeing, and frankly, to kind of paint the picture on this, I look at technology that our internal staff has looked at, right? So every piece of technology that we can get our hands on is reviewed by our team. And then if it's good, then they'll cover it with me, say every other week. Now we're moving to every week, right? Most of those tools don't make it to me because most of them don't even work yet, right? You've got to have a big database and of pure, accurate data for AI to be effective when it comes to making the big moves, right? So, and understanding that that data really is based on the internet, especially when it comes to diversity. When we did some tests on that, I think in November, we did a program on this topic that you can go back and rewatch, but it really does talk about the effects of AI on diversity. And AI is saying, here's diversity, and this is why it happens. But then when you run it, it itself is very biased because it's based on our thoughts and what's on the internet. So if you can take that thought and carry it through to, is this tool going to be accurate based on the data that it's using? So there's a lot of factors to take into consideration. And my caution would be, don't just go with the bright, shiny object. Look at your ecosystem. Of course, you're going to look at your tech stack, right? But look at your ecosystem. What's the effects and what are the long-reaching effects across the board? What's on that?
Well,
Yeah,
there's an awful lot to unpack there. Christine, go ahead, Ken.
I'll just do a add on that, again, HR leaders, no matter the function or if you're the, overseeing the function, have to lean in on artificial intelligence capabilities and technology and leveraged, as you point out, the talent access, the talent management, the talent engagement, and how do you excite and create an employee experience, leveraging that, and then really get in the game finally to push that boulder up the hill to be on the table with analytics. And I think AI provides a lot of opportunity, which I think, Clem can kind of weigh in on. And how do you improve development? I mean, I read a study recently from McKinsey that 40% of roles people are going to need to expand to get into. In other words, what's happening is because of digitalization and technology, the roles are getting bigger and the opportunities are to kind of expand those skills of people to get into those. And how do you leverage technology and learning to kind of do that, and or staffing to kind of get the people in who can move to those roles? But again, HR leaders, lean in, leverage, don't fear it. Clem, dive in.
Yeah, Ken, I think that's exactly right. You can't really hide from where things are going with AI because it is actually already here. I'm actually kind of fortunate with FutureSolve, like you alluded to this, Ken, that we actually bring some technology solutions to bear for our clients, and pretty much everything that we offer, and I think this is most technology firms, by the way, there's an AI component underlying the technology. In the things that kind of come to mind, just to give some very specific examples, would be sourcing and the recruitment process. We've seen how technology actually is, using AI. It's actually looking at candidates to validate what they say their skills are, because, you can list a skill, in LinkedIn, any skill you want, but there's not really a way to know if that's real. Using AI, you can kind of compare what websites a person is going to in terms of what they're reading, and looking at other certifications from other sites to actually validate that. We're seeing AI being used in analytics platforms, and this, I think, has the potential to help HR a lot. Because most of us tend not to come from like a real hardcore data or statistical background. So some of the things that are really hard, like looking at predictive analytics, doing regression modeling and things of that sort, using AI technology, a lot of that is going to be done sort of behind the scenes for us. So if we, using your thing, Ken, around really harnessing it, understanding how this technology works, we can actually be better at what our craft is. Learning would be a whole nother area, really trying to look at what learning opportunities are right for a particular role that a person plays. That sort of thing in the past has kind of been difficult, and a lot of it is just self-identified by a person in a role. And so I think using more sophisticated technology powered with AI and so forth, we'll see that really opens up where people are being fed different opportunities, that a system can help identify for them. So it's out there already. And I think all of us should really be studying it. We should really be healthy skeptics too of, when we have suppliers and vendors touting, this is driven by AI, to really ask deeply, like, how is that? What is happening? Underlying it, to make sure there's not bias going on and things of that nature. And then the second hat that HR wears, which is different than a lot of business functions, is, we certainly have to be good stewards of how we use AI within HR, but then we kind of have a governance role in the organization to also ensure that our people are educated around, how to use AI, because it's going to permeate all aspects of our business, and to really, foster that education among the workforce. Make sure there's the right governance and compliance around how the company is utilizing technology that has AI built into it. So I think we play a special role in, helping, steward that forward.
It's a huge job. I've got to tell you though, and I think Jess will attest to this too. Jess runs the consulting side of people science. The number one, if I had to say, and somebody did ask me this a couple of weeks ago, the number one downfall that we see when we come in to do an analysis of where their entire HR, specifically their talent acquisition is, it's metrics. HR falls short in having them. And again, I think to your point, Clem, most people in HR weren't born on the analytical side, right? You come at it from more the humanistic side, right? The social studies and literature students as compared to, mathematics and logistics. So I think that has been, but this is a huge opportunity. And I think the rush, and one of the biggest downfalls that we've seen too, is like putting all of your dollars and all of your focus into your ATS and then expecting it to give you data that it doesn't. When the applicant tracking system picks up when the applicant applies, but when we look at what's happening in talent on the talent act side, it's a lot bigger than that, right? There's a lot more going on. And the same thing internally in HR. Many times I see companies that are bound to what their HRIS or IS system can tell them and their roadmap. And I think it's really time to flip that narrative. So now moving into 2024, here's some cool things that we're seeing that AI is doing. When we talk about how do we make sure that we're training internally to the talent sets that we need, that we're uplifting career pathing, that we're solving our own talent gap issues, right? So how do we do that? And by the way, if you are thinking in terms of this is going to be an outside fix, I don't think we're going to close the gap by the influence of the government. Layoffs certainly are not going to do it. I think education would like to do it, but in my opinion, it works over and over again for 30 years when the company embraces it and said, how am I going to prepare for my talent and my strategy? And now it's even more sophisticated. But one of the cool things that we're seeing is technology that can go in and say, this is my candidate, my internal candidate on a career path for this job opening. This is my referral for this job opening. This is my applicants for this job opening, and these are my source candidates. Bringing them all together, and now I have a true view of the talent that's available, whether it's outside and applying or outside I'm trying to get it. And it also tells me what, if I'm truly committed to career pathing internally, what can I train to? What are those specific skill sets? So going into this year, we have a technology ourselves that are doing this. If anybody's interested, just shoot us a note. But I think that's really going to help level the playing field and bring that whole ecosystem together. Thoughts around that? Taking a look at that whole, at every single, because I think now what happens is we silo it, right? It's somebody in, it's an internal candidate. We want to elevate them. We put them in the position and they fail and they leave. It's like the numbers on that are like 60% fail, right? So instead of that, saying, well, wait a minute, now I have a comparison. Now I can see who is the absolute best candidate for this. It doesn't do away with, I want to keep my referrals going and I want a career path. It just gives me more guidance in what I need to do if in fact I need to change that.
Well, I think, you know, you're certainly getting at the fact that there's still, as much as we've been doing recruiting for decades and decades, there's tons of opportunity to bring more, you know, rigor around how we do selection and actually looking at what really works in terms of the successful profile that we have. It does lead into the learning and development front, though, because sometimes we bring in people that maybe don't have the right specific skills, but they, you know, they have some good core capabilities and whatnot. So how we actually onboard and train, you know, people to set them up for success and whatnot, that's a whole nother kind of area that we could probably talk about.
Well, and that's, you know, part of the 3 pillars of retention. And I can give you a lot of statistics on that, but when you look at your own internal employees, so much at you know, in that first year come into play with, are you, and the secret formula, right? So Ken, you and I talked about this years ago, still holds true. Our most recent one is we were working with a company that had 116% churn in a particular space. That was in Q3, 23, Q4, they're down to 110. That's a pretty big jump. 161 to 110, so 50% decrease. And we anticipate that we're going to see that keep happening. And the way that they're doing it is by really connecting, HR is doing this, is really involved in this. On the business side, making sure they understand not just the employee value proposition of the whole organization, but how it's disseminated into the divisions and all the way down to, let's say, Clem, that hiring manager, the person who's running the minute-by-minute show. And then making sure their intentions are connected clearly with training and then clearly with the Talent Act team. When you line those 3 up, we see an incredible retention rate. We see these rates come all the way up in the first year. And that data can then be transferred backwards into year 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
We're
think
familiar that with FutureSolve, with a technology solution around retention, that, and this is something, you know, when I was an HR leader, we didn't have it wasn't easy to have both a micro look, what's going on with the individual employees in the individual workplace. Sometimes we could get a view of the forest, but very seldom a view of the trees. Now with AI, there are tools out there that give HR leaders and business leaders an opportunity to see what's going on in the hearts and minds of the individual employees and the overarching department or division or business, to really have them be able to provide interventions to make a difference, like the example that you gave. And leveraging people science, leveraging tools and technology can help to really make a difference. The other thing technologies I'm seeing helps these mid-cap companies is providing a value proposition to make the investments that need to be made to get the return on those investments, which, again, to Clem and Christine's earlier point around, you know, we haven't had necessarily an economic or analytic background. We aren't always great at providing that platform to the CFO that shows, in order to get this, we have to invest that. Therefore, it's worth the investment to make. But I am excited about what that micro and macro view can start to give business leaders an.
Oh, Ken froze.
Yeah, Ken.
HR leaders on how to intervene and start to excite and engage, employees in the workforce.
Hey, Ken, you were fading in and out in the last like minute, just, minute.
We lost your your second to
Yeah,
last
that's
sentence.
one of the challenges of being in the mountains. I apologize.
Yeah, you probably aren't on Xfinity internet, I guess.
Oh, good
Yeah.
plug.
Yes. Yeah. Plug for my old,
Clem still has
employer.
Comcast, I say it all the time, tattooed right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Christine, back to what you were saying about kind of a few things, this broader ecosystem of the business and people and whatnot and engagement. I think to me, what I was hearing you hit on is that this piece around hiring the right people, from the beginning, get the right people on the bus, things work a lot better. But it takes more than that. And, it's supporting the individual to be successful in what they do. Like when people feel good about they're actually being successful in their work and they're making impact, on the business and whatever the mission of the business is, and they have career development opportunities. When you get those all firing on the right cylinders, that really, it leads to the loyalty that, keeps people engaged, performing high. 2024 is actually a perfect year to really focus on getting that flywheel to work right, because we finally 2021 and 2022 was really hard in HR because the labor market was going crazy. People were getting offers that you just couldn't match. There was a lot of disruption happening with companies, turnover was high and so forth. So fortunately, we see, a lot less of that churn in our workforces across companies and whatnot. So now's the perfect time to really say, let's focus on the people that we have, engaging them, getting them, set up right, and helping them feel super motivated and excited about the work they're doing and having career development opportunities. And Ken, you mentioned like we have so many more tools nowadays to really understand the employee sentiment along their life cycle, from before they join all the way through to being onboarded and to performing in the job. Like, 5-10 years ago, you just didn't have that insight. So like use that data to really understand what's going on.
And use it wisely.
Yes.
No assumptions. I think, one of the biggest, there's so much noise, right? Social media has, and actually next month we're going to talk about transparency in HR in general, but seriously, everybody has a voice these days. So I think understand and not being blown around by every wind can be very difficult, right? But where we see complications come in is when the assumption is this is what everybody wants, right? And then when, by the way, nobody calls us and says it's easy. So we come in and we're like, oh, well, we're hiring Gen Z and this is what's happening and this is why we're leaving. And then we go in and we find out, wait a minute, maybe is Gen Z your right market because your company culture is not as inclusive as they would like, and that's okay, but you need to hire people that are of your same mindset. They say we have a country divided. It's kind of easy to understand that. But I think one of the things that we'll see towards the end of this year as we start to focus more on what's important to my employee, to those 7 people that report directly to me. When we start to look at that, I think we're going to find that not one size does not fit all. Right. At the same time, and just as reported at Davis last week, the Edelman Trust Barometer came out again saying that 64% of the world's population is counting on their CEOs and their business leaders to get behind their cause. Right. If you take it a step further, 94% of the work population that was polled said that they believe that Gen Z is making strides in the workforce that are benefiting the entire whole, which is, so is that power shift? And that's what we're going to talk about with return to work. So let's move on to that topic, unless anybody has anything else to add, and we'll just keep going too. But that power shift, right? So I think we started to see a power shift before. Certainly, if you look at the ecosystem and how much bigger, so only 17% of that workforce ecosystem is job openings and companies. 17%. So the rest of the ecosystem is your employees and your potential employees. So if we think in those terms, when we make decisions about return to work, are we looking at that? When we make decisions about mass layoffs, when we make decisions about how we're going to grade performances, are we really taking all that power shift into consideration, and do we need to?
Well, having, worked for a long time in larger companies, I do think that, most organizations are trying to be thoughtful around return to work policies and what fits their specific company. I don't know that I would say that I don't have like deep things to offer around that. I think companies, clearly you can see where we are today, that they're taking different tacks around that. There's not too many companies are mandating 5 days in the office a week, a few are. But I think what the good companies are really doing is ensuring that the employee experience when people come in the office is meaningful. They're not only articulating, what the benefits are to being in the office around collaboration, ideation, mentoring, coaching, team building and those sort of things, but they're actually doing things to try to make that real, so the proof point exists when somebody does show up, and, some are better at it than others. I think there's many companies who are going to continue to stay, primarily virtual, and that'll be a way that they attract certain talent. Like you said, Christine, maybe it's more millennials and things of that sort, but it's, it could be beyond that. It's people who value that, that flexibility to, work in, pajamas and stuff, at the end of the day, or, be able to scoot off and get kids from school and whatnot. So, I think there's going to be a dichotomy, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I was told early on the trend's your friend, and clearly the trend is hybrid workforce, leverage technology. It's there. It's actually improves the situation. And to me, creates a broader, more open, more transparent environment. I was on a call with the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, where the CEO was able to reach out to every single one of their teammates in a key communication that they wouldn't have considered prior to, having to operate via virtual with Zoom or other kind of Microsoft meeting. And so, I think the way forward is a hybrid workforce and in being agile and adaptable. However, there's clarity around learning takes place, not just virtual, and the opportunities to have people working together in an office environment, at some point is a healthy process as well.
And I think too, from the candidate's perspective, it's like, why do I have to go in on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday? Why are you dictating what I have to do?
Mhm.
And then we hear, of course, from the business side, I had to figure out what I'm doing with this office space. That's a big hush hush. And I have to figure out what kind of policies we should put in place that benefit everybody, not just Sally, who wants to come in on Tuesday and Thursday instead of Monday, Tuesday. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of moving pieces, and
Yeah.
I think people are like, oh, it's already been put to rest. That's not what I'm hearing. And what we're hearing too is coming from the candidates that we talk to, or the employees that we're talking to, that are concerned and, keeping an eye out, that want this flexibility, right? And then others that don't. I mean, how much, I think one of the things that I kind of go back to, especially working in and around the Valley for quite a few years, that was the place where you made your friends. They hired their friends, they hired their spouses, they hired friends that their friends can date. That was a big part of the work culture in that age bracket, just out of college. Another point, another Simon Sinek point I heard the other day is, when you're in the office and then, you have a tough day and you go meet your friends at the bar, you guys have a drink, you talk about what's happened, you're kind of voicing your concerns. Those outlets don't exist when you're predominantly remote. I mean, there's so many changes that come with this, but I do see it as a big catalyst in making that needle move towards this shift in so much power being on the employer side as compared to the employee side. I think that it's a good barometer of it.
Yeah. Well, it's there's definitely a pendulum. You know, I was referencing back in 2021, 2022, when the labor market was kind of crazy, where, you know, people were really competing super hard, like I've never seen before, for talent. Um, Clearly the pendulum is swinging over more towards the employer side right now. Um, you know, but good talent is always hard to
Towards,
find.
you think it's swinging more towards the employer side today?
Yes, yeah, I think
From
that's
2021, but
yeah, from
right,
2021.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
20, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you know, you're seeing that, you know, there's not the same level of turnover occurring in organizations right at this point. But, you know, but that doesn't mean that loyalty is increasing from your workforce. And that's why, you know, to the earlier discussion around really understanding where the mindset of your workforce is and really understanding where employee engagement levels sit is really important, because you know, you can't possibly be getting the best performance out of somebody unless they're really enthused about what they're doing.
Yeah, their engagement rate. But do you anticipate that we're going to see more movement towards, you know, more of that balance going towards the employee? Or, well, let me ask it this way. I think companies resigned themselves in the 2000s after the tech boom to 2 years, 2 years, 2 years is what we expect. That's how we're building our organizations. There are some mindsets out there that are now saying, you know, you can build retention. Certainly the polls with Gen Z and millennials is that they are looking for a longer term commitment. They want it to be the right commitment, and the demands on the commitments are really high, right? Much higher than I think we've seen before. However, they do want to see that happen. Some of it is because the mass layoffs haven't affected their parents as much as it had their grandparents, kind of thing, whatever the cause is. In your experience, are there organizations that are saying, wait a minute, we want to go past the 2-year mark. We want a greater retention rate. We are looking at 10, 20-year commitments from our staff. Anybody hearing that out there at this point?
You know, with the mid-cap companies, and that's the space that I've been dancing in, you know, in the last several years, and even just shifting into it, Christine, I think it's a really important question. I think you're seeing organizations being more deliberate on why they exist, right? What's their purpose? And by helping to define their purpose and then communicating that to both their current workforce and potential teammates outside through the candidate reaching process, there's a recognition that there's value in retaining your teammates and then building and expanding their capability when you have them. However, I think it's too early, at least from my perspective, to say, is that the mindset moving forward? Is that the real trend? I do think the organizations that I've seen, and we've worked with a couple professional services firms that typically were, you know, kind of churning 2 years, that have really kind of focused and said, here's who we are, here's why we do what we do. And we want you to be here for the long term, you know, even if you don't make a partner in certain firms, but there's a role for everyone to be there. Is that going to take a step in the, you know, direction? It's still, to me, early to say, because to your point, employees also are getting a little bit more power. And so when you have more choice, you know, you kind of listen to those other opportunities. But those organizations that lack the purpose and the willingness to kind of develop people and provide opportunities for growth are going to, you know, continue to have a challenge, I believe. I don't know, Clem, what you may be.
I agree with that 100%, Ken. Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, and you've referenced it, Christine, like employees actually do have a bigger voice today. And I think a lot of it is because there's a lot more social tools that are available and at their disposal. You know, that's one thing, obviously, you know, the internet has provided, which is you can find like-minded people, you know, much quicker than you could in, you know, in the old world. Almost everybody's probably seen that one video that came out a few weeks ago of, a woman videoed herself getting fired, from that tech. She was doing actually business development for a tech company and got fired online, and that thing went viral. It's amazing that one person, their voice has kind of gone all the way up to the CEO of that company to, come out and acknowledge they didn't really handle that the best way,
I think we're going to see that shift continue because of the scarcity. And again, I'm looking at it from the scarcity of talent. Like it's such an uneven match, right? But we're not going to close that without really considering and looking at how we can retain the people that we have. And I'm hoping that we'll see that this year, that we'll see those, that sway go even further. Let's just talk a minute too about diversity and inclusion. How it's going internally for customers is always an interesting perspective for me. We were all talking just before we went live about this, but we saw a slowdown in dollars being allocated to supplier diversity in the beginning of last year. So spring of 2022, it was pretty obvious that those budgets that had this big infusion were actually lost budget, or budget was cut. And I don't know that how much more we moved those needles, but some of the timelines, I mean, when we talk about diversity, I think Ken said it earlier, it's a heavy lift. Good change is a heavy lift. For example, the emancipation of slaves was only 194 years ago, when you think about that, right? The country's a little over 200 years old. It was 194 years ago. Women's suffrage movement was 176 years ago. The Civil Rights Act was signed 60 years ago. That's not that long ago, really. And then the progress that was made starting in 2016 and then going through the pandemic and through the turmoil that our country went through, we made great strides. But are we at a pause? I would argue we're at a pause.
Are we at a pause? Christine, pause is not the terminology that I actually would prefer for using. I think I agree with where you're saying that in 2023, there was a bit of a retrenchment that we see happening in the DEI space. Clearly, in some circles, there's been very explicit pushback, on the notion of, diversity programs and things of that sort. To me, if you're looking at the long game on this, the biggest implication is from a talent standpoint. And how do you both attract and retain the best talent that comes from all different backgrounds? And to me, that's a big element of diversity. The second piece that I do think we're going to see come out more prominently rolling forward is around the notion of inclusion. So if inclusion is around helping every single individual in the company be the best that they can be, as well as creating an optimal team dynamic, who can argue against inclusivity? So I think there's probably going to be a lot more focus on that element of DEI. Even just last week, though, in terms of the actual number of jobs, like LinkedIn published a very small research piece around, in I think 2022, the chief diversity officer / VP of diversity at companies was the #3 most posted job that they had on LinkedIn. So as we ended 2023, I think it had slipped from #3 to #7. And the point of the article was that 7th is still pretty high. And so a lot of companies are still, pushing in that diversity space. They're probably talking about it differently and so forth, because it can be a little bit of a polarizing, topic inside companies and so forth. So I think the best companies are going to continue to look for ways to, harness the most out of a broad workforce and get the most out of their employee base, and ensure that DEI is just integrated. It's not a standalone thing. It's got to be tied to business outcomes and making the business better. As long as those things are being done, I think I don't think I don't think DEI is dead. I think it's just or stalled. I think it's just it has had a very rapid evolution over the last year.
If I can weigh in, I think you're both right. 'Cause at least from what I'm reading and hearing, the good news is from 2016, where you really had an increased focus. Now you've had, some major research done that has shown it's good for business. A DEI focus and improving the diversity in your organization usually and more often than not, I guess the statistics show, improves performance of the organization. To your point, Clem, it makes you more attractive to a broader base of candidates to join your organization. And most, employees, again, you never can say 100%, but most employees want to work in a place that is diverse. It's not everyone like themselves, where they can learn from others and experience other people's experience. So I do think it's not as active, to Christine's point, as it was in, let's say, even 2021, 2022. But I think, to your point, Clem, it's still peripherally as a result of that. I think there's more infrastructure around it. And I think there's a better chance that not only the good companies, but a broader base companies will start to have policies that are sustainable and initiatives that are built into their infrastructure and given resources behind it.
You know what I think? I think FutureSolve needs to come out with a program called Reinventing Inclusion. There you go, Clem. Because I think we're way far off. Maybe we're fighting the battle way too long. Especially, coming from the supplier, I've been a part of the Supplier Diversity Development Board, which is bringing diverse suppliers to the table. What a fail. It is a routine fail over and over and over. And there's good intention, but there's not enough power behind it. Right. And I think, this goes back to what we're talking about, the power shift. There's a lot of power in the seat. There's a lot of power in the C-suite. Did you see Bernie Sanders is now calling for like caps on CEOs' salaries? I saw that came out on Bloomberg this morning. You gotta love this guy's energy, right? But I just think it's way far off the mark. I think we need to look at inclusion differently. I think we need to rethink it. Maybe we'll do something together. Who knows on that?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from the audience. Just, do we have questions coming in too? Because I know we're coming up on the top of the hour here.
Yeah, so someone asked, by mid-2023, DEI related job postings declined 44% from the same time a year prior, according to a 2023 study on Indeed. They're asking, is it time for organizations to enforce consequential accountability around DEI initiatives and stop making DEI a nice to have? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's definitely organizations that over the past few years have tried to put more teeth to DEI by actually tying rewards, and compensation to that. Actually, one of the companies that I've been with has done that in the past around, percentage of bonus and so forth. So there's probably many fewer companies doing that than greater. More typically, I think organizations, to promote accountability, will build it into like performance objectives, MBOs, and so forth for leaders, around certain diversity numbers. The key around all of that is picking what really are the right expectations. Like, is it representation, or is it things around inclusivity? Is it around learning and development? So I think every organization has to think hard about like what's right for them to measure and what's right for them to actually, require through these various accountability measures. So will it actually increase or decrease in the future? I don't know. I guess if I had to predict, I don't think it's going to be, increasing as you were saying, Ken. It seems like things have sort of, been, the foot's off the pedal a little bit in certain elements of diversity.
I don't think measurement's working. We could do like a crossfire thing, Clem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think measurement works. Having been part of that SDDC, it's kind of like, oh, we got to make this number. Let's find a diverse supplier. There's a lot of women in staffing, so let's find a staffing agency and give them a couple things, and there it goes.
Yeah.
Come on, let's get real, right?
Yeah.
And then on the employment side, the same thing. Oh, we need to bring up our, our category in African Americans. So we're going to hire to this one space where that happens the most.
Yeah.
And then, and it's a challenge too, right? Because there is this, there are demographics that work with this as far as skills and how committed are you? I think there are organizations that do an awesome job. We have a case study. Just let's push that case study out. I would love for you guys to see it too. I'll tell you the name of the company. It's not on there. It's Verizon, who's done a heck of a good job. I mean, for years, like from 2000 on, since I've known them, their dedication to bringing diversity in is the highest that I've seen in the US, honestly. That I just haven't bumped into it anywhere else. But their board actually challenged HR to hire into the C-suite at a higher level. They gave it to us to use our technology to prove that it couldn't happen. Mercer has said it couldn't happen. I didn't think for a second it could happen. I gave it to 2 rookies. That space is over 56% diverse. You do get what you look for.
Yes.
The question is, how committed are you? How heavy do you want to, how much of the heavy lift are you willing to do to change that? And then, how do you, and then as HR people, how do we equate that into ROI as compared to cost?
Right.
So
Just quickly, to
Okay.
your earlier example, how you leverage technology on insights when you're trying to make that point, you now have less risk in going and making those commitments to increase the diversity, and you have more capability to learn where to go, how to go, and if you're running into trouble, to explain why you're running into trouble.
So Ken's going to head up that practice, because that's a really good way to go into it. I know we are coming up on time. We want to go around and do final thoughts.
Just there's one more question, I think.
Sure, let's answer that question. What ways would you suggest we gather that info consistently from employees? So gauging, employee loyalty and if they're happy or not at their job.
Yeah.
For instance, through performance evaluations, learning management systems, or other AI technology. So we can gather that at a management level.
Yes. Yeah. So there's two ways that come to mind for me immediately. One is kind of the implicit, and that takes some analytics and so forth by really looking at what's happening. Turnover rates and things of that sort. You could look at, how the employee value proposition is hunting by looking at applicant flow. Is it going up? Is it going down? What learning is being consumed and so forth. So you can gain lots of insights that way. But the other way is more explicit, really asking employees. A lot of companies now do annual employee surveys. Many companies have taken a play from Net Promoter System to measure customer satisfaction and loyalty, and turn that inward around employee promoters, employee NPS and so forth. So I kind of like that, because most of the times when you do those employee NPS surveys, they're shorter intervals, not once a year, but maybe once a month or every other month. And they're real quick. They're like 3 questions. So you're not like, creating survey fatigue and whatnot. So there's, so there's a few different ways. If I see that came from a person named Bobby, if you're interested, I'm happy to, tell you a little bit more about some things that I've seen in the marketplace, including, some things that that we do at FutureSolve.
Yeah, I'll do the paid political announcement real quick, in that, at FutureSolve, we have partnerships where, again, there's technology that allows you to look at the micro and macro hearts and minds of the associates. And we do it both with new teammates coming into organizations, as well as more longstanding, where there's been some significant change, or even a change of a leader, and they're starting to see people leave. You can actually, as an HR leader, start to dive in and get information directly from your teammates, and then kind of bundle that from macro standpoint.
Next month, Kevin Haran, who's the Chief Soul Officer, that's his title, is going to be pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Somebody said to me yesterday, "Oh, that's too much." I love it. Kevin, I think, was on in 2020, but he and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and he had this exact issue, right? So he's able to measure his employee engagement in real time, and almost had a mass exodus because of a change that they made in leadership. He believes in transparency, so he's coming on in February and he's going to talk about that. So I'm sure he can tell us what tools he used, how he did it. It's a pretty exciting story that he's going to share with us. And our topic for next month is transparency, but the employee engagement is a big part of that. Any other questions we should get to? I know somebody had their hand up there for a minute, Jess, before we do final comments. Thank you.
I think we're good for final comments.
Okay. Ken, you want to go first?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully the folks on, for me, learning, I've learned some new things from our discussion today. Learning is one of the most important things to kind of keep alive and, keep growing. And so when I have a chance to participate as a listener or a presenter, I always try to take advantage. So thanks, Christine and Jess, for the opportunity to participate with you all today.
Yeah.
Great having you.
And I would really just echo that. Even Ken, we get to spend time together, but just even spending this and having a chance to hear from your vast experience is great. And Christine, I really love your your spunky moderation and whatnot. Fantastic. The one area that maybe in a future date we could talk about that we didn't is really kind of that movement to skills-based learning. I think that's going to be increasingly important for a bunch of reasons. Some is the rapid, technology landscape evolution, but another is like college just seems like it's kind of becoming more outmoded and just so darn expensive. There has to be other ways for people, to really learn. So that could be a great future topic.
I agree. Look, we agree.
That'd be a good topic.
Yeah.
So, looking to the future of HR for this year, based on past years, I think HR decision makers and recruiters are feeling more optimistic about the future of recruiting. I'm hearing more talk about investing in AI-powered recruiting tools, DEI initiatives, things like that. So, we've been hearing in the past so much about recruiters being afraid of AI and automation. I don't think they're recruiters, or the majority of recruiters that are in the seat today want to be piled down with all these busy tasks that don't elevate their roles, especially for those Gen Zs who are looking for the lazy girls jobs. It's really just, how can I make my job easier and see the workplace evolve? So I'm looking forward to see what 2024 brings for us.
Me too. So on that, I'll just remind everybody that I still think going into 2024, our hot topics first going to be know your own metrics. I know I always talk about the big picture nationally, what's going on with the JOLTS reports and job audit, but it's really important, in my opinion, to take that into your internal teams and say, how do these numbers affect us and what's going on in our own ecosystem? And thinking about the ecosystem, looking at HI, doing that good work before you pull the trigger. Don't waste the dollars, understand where it's needed, just like you would with any other part of the tech stack. And I'm going to be curious to see what happens with inclusion this year. That'll be really interesting. And I think return to work is going to stay there. But definitely this is a year that I think we're either going to turn a corner in a power shift and move further towards employee engagement, or see things kind of flatten out, kind of like they did, in my opinion, with diversity. No matter what the case, HR plays a really important role. Thank you for joining. Helping us get smarter, and together we'll all get smarter, because we're the ones that are really going to make a difference. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll meet again, Ken and Clem.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.